What was meant to be the most unforgettable experience of their lives turned into a tragedy that no one saw coming. A luxury cruise on the high seas, a celebration of love and life, quickly transformed into a deadly nightmare. Sarah Brooks, a vibrant 32-year-old woman, boarded the cruise ship with her husband, Tom, for what was supposed to be the honeymoon of their dreams. They had been married for just over a year, and this trip was a chance for the couple to relax, enjoy the sun, and make memories on the open ocean. The ship, with its sprawling decks and endless amenities, was a symbol of the life they had worked so hard to build together. To the outside world, the Brooks marriage appeared perfect. Tom, 34 years old, was the charming, successful businessman, handsome, confident, and always by Sarah's side. Sarah, a kind-hearted, thoughtful woman with a successful career of her own, seemed to have it all. They were the picture-perfect couple, smiling for photos with breathtaking ocean backdrops, their love shining through every frame. But beneath the surface of this idyllic getaway, trouble was brewing. Sarah had always known that Tom could be a little possessive, but it had started to get worse after the wedding. He would question her about who she was talking to, why she took so long to get ready, or why she seemed so distracted. At first, Sarah dismissed it as typical marriage jitters. But during their cruise, it became clear that Tom's behavior was no longer just a quirk. It was something more dangerous. He had begun to isolate her, getting upset over the smallest things. He'd disparage her friends, calling them a bad influence, and would grow jealous if she spoke to anyone else on the ship, even the crew. Sarah started to feel increasingly trapped, unsure of what to do or who to turn to. By the fourth day of their cruise, Sarah realized things had gone too far. What was supposed to be a romantic getaway had turned into a suffocating prison. Tom's jealousy reached a boiling point during a casual conversation at the ship's bar. Tom had accused her of flirting with a crew member, a harmless interaction that Sarah thought nothing of. But in Tom's eyes, it was a betrayal. His face darkened with anger, and in front of several passengers, he raised his voice, demanding to know who else she had been speaking to. Sarah was stunned, humiliated, and unable to reason with him. She knew she had to leave. But where could she go? In the middle of the ocean, surrounded by strangers, there was no way to escape. The tension between them grew over the following days. Their arguments were frequent and loud. Other passengers on the ship could hear the couple shouting at each other in their cabin late at night. Sarah's once joyful demeanor now showed signs of fear, her eyes downcast, her smile forced. Tom's temper seemed to flare over trivial things, and Sarah found herself walking on eggshells around him. The dream vacation was turning into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Then, on the night of the murder, it all came to a head. After a quiet dinner together, the tension finally erupted. Sarah, feeling more and more suffocated, decided to take a walk out on the ship's deck alone to clear her head. Tom, ever watchful, followed her. It was then that everything changed. What seemed like a routine argument between husband and wife escalated into something far darker. Tom, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, made a decision that would haunt everyone on board and the authorities on land forever. This was no longer just an argument. This was a crime in the making. A man's jealousy and need for control would push him to a devastating act, and in the process, a woman's life would be cut short in the middle of the vast ocean. The dream vacation had turned into a tragic story of betrayal, rage, and ultimately murder. As the ship continued its course, the passengers had no idea what had happened, but soon everything would change. No one knew then, but in a few days an international manhunt would begin, and the FBI would be called in to track down a killer in the most unlikely of places, international waters. This is the shocking story of a vacation gone wrong, a tale of murder, betrayal, and justice that unfolds with every twist, every new revelation, and every piece of evidence that would ultimately expose the dark side of a marriage that no one saw coming. From the outside, Tom and Sarah Brooks seemed like the perfect couple, a match made in heaven. Their social media was full of happy posts, vacation photos in exotic locations, fancy dinners, and romantic getaways. Their family and friends admired their seemingly flawless relationship. They were the couple everyone envied. the picture-perfect union that represented success, love, and happiness. But appearances, as we know, can be deceiving. Sarah Brooks had always been successful, independent, and driven. At 32, she had established herself as a highly respected marketing executive with a promising career. She was intelligent, compassionate, and had built lasting friendships both professionally and personally. She came from a close-knit family who had supported her through every step of her life. Sarah had always dreamed of finding someone who could match her ambition, who would support her, and be her partner in life. Enter Tom, a handsome, charismatic man in his mid-30s. Tom seemed to have everything a woman could want. A successful businessman, well-groomed, with a natural charm that made people want to be around him. Tom was the kind of man who could captivate an entire room with his smile. At first, he seemed like the perfect match for Sarah. He admired her accomplishments, supported her career, and showered her with affection. He loved being the center of attention, and Sarah, who had always been a bit more reserved, found his confidence both charming and flattering. His constant compliments made her feel special, and for the first time in her life, she felt she had truly found someone who got her. Their relationship moved quickly. The whirlwind romance was everything Sarah had ever dreamed of. They moved in together within months, and just a year later, they were engaged. The wedding, held on a beautiful spring afternoon, was nothing short of magical. Friends and family watched as Tom and Sarah exchanged vows, with Sarah glowing in her wedding dress and Tom standing proudly beside her. They looked like the ideal couple, and everyone around them seemed sure that they had found true love. However, as is often the case, the honeymoon phase didn't last long. After their wedding, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in Tom's behavior. At first, they were small things, a snide comment here, a raised eyebrow there. But over time, the cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship started to show. Tom became more possessive, more controlling. It started with innocent comments about her interactions with other men. He would ask her questions like, "Who was that guy you were talking to at the grocery store?" Or "Why did you stay late at work?" Sarah thought it was harmless at first, just a partner who cared a little too much. But soon, it began to feel like he was monitoring her every move. He'd get angry if she didn't reply to his text messages immediately, or if she spent time with friends without him. He would criticize her for wearing certain clothes, telling her that they were too revealing, or not appropriate for a woman of her age. Sarah began to feel like she was constantly walking on eggshells. When she tried to have a conversation about her feelings, Tom would turn the tables, accusing her of being ungrateful for everything he'd done for her. He would gaslight her, making her question whether she was being unreasonable. Over time, Sarah stopped bringing up her concerns. She told herself that maybe he was just stressed, or that his insecurities were getting the best of him. She didn't want to rock the boat, so she ignored the signs. The strain on Sarah was noticeable to her close friends. She had always been outgoing and social, but as Tom's behavior became more controlling, she began pulling away from her social circle. She stopped going out with her friends, cutting back on work events, and even avoiding conversations with her family. Tom would make passive-aggressive remarks whenever she spent time away from him, and he would express dissatisfaction if she didn't devote all of her attention to him. Her friends tried to talk to her about it, but Sarah was always quick to defend him. "It's just a phase," she'd say. "He's just under a lot of pressure at work." But things were getting progressively worse. Tom's temper began to flare up over minor issues. He would shout at her for not answering the phone on the first ring, or for spending a few extra minutes talking to someone at the store. He would accuse her of things she hadn't done and make her feel guilty for simply existing. Sarah started to feel like she was losing herself, like she was no longer the woman she once was. As the months went on, the pressure on Sarah mounted. She could no longer justify Tom's behavior as stress or insecurity. The controlling tendencies, the jealousy, and the outbursts were signs of something darker. But Sarah didn't know how to escape. She loved Tom, or at least the person she thought he was. She was afraid to admit that her marriage had become unhealthy, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was in danger. She wanted to leave, but the guilt and the fear of Tom's reaction kept her trapped. When they boarded the cruise ship for their honeymoon, Sarah hoped the change in scenery would breathe new life into their relationship. The peaceful, tropical surroundings of the cruise were supposed to help them reconnect. However, instead of the romantic vacation they had planned, it became a symbol of Sarah's desperation. Tom's jealousy and possessiveness only intensified on the ship. He accused her of looking at other passengers, he argued with crew members, and he would not let her out of his sight. What was supposed to be a dream honeymoon quickly turned into a psychological nightmare. The situation reached its breaking point when Sarah started to realize that if she didn't act soon, she might never get the chance to escape. She had heard the stories of women trapped in controlling relationships and what happened when they didn't leave. But in the middle of the ocean, with no way out, Sarah felt completely powerless. The fifth night of the cruise was supposed to be just like any other, a peaceful evening under the stars with the soft waves rocking the ship. But for Sarah Brooks, this night would be her last. What began as a quiet evening between husband and wife would soon unravel into a chilling tale of betrayal, rage, and death. The couple had just finished dinner, and while the other guests were still socializing or enjoying the evening entertainment, Sarah and Tom made their way to the deck of the cruise ship. Tom had grown increasingly distant throughout the day, and Sarah, feeling the weight of his jealousy and possessiveness, decided she needed to get some fresh air to clear her mind. Tom, as he had done all week, insisted on coming along. Sarah stepped out onto the deck, the ocean breeze brushing against her face, but the relief she had hoped for was short-lived. Tom's temper had reached a boiling point. He had been stewing all night, frustrated by something Sarah couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was the smile she had given a fellow passenger at dinner or the way she had laughed when a crew member made a joke. Whatever it was, Tom had seized upon it, his gaze narrowing with suspicion and bitterness. "Why do you always look at other men that way?" Tom's voice broke the quiet of the night, sharp and accusing. Sarah turned to face him, her heart racing. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but she could feel her palms beginning to sweat. She had grown used to his outbursts, but each time they came, they took her by surprise. "I saw the way you were looking at him tonight, the waiter. You think I don't notice?" Tom was close to her now, his face inches from hers, eyes filled with anger. "You can't keep your eyes off of anyone but me. Why can't you just act like a wife should?" His words came out in a rush, bitter and laced with venom. Sarah took a step back, her chest tightening. She had heard these accusations before, jealous rants that would often escalate into arguments. But there was something different about tonight. It was like a switch had flipped in Tom's mind. His words were no longer those of an insecure husband. This time, they were words of control, demanding, suffocating, and full of an underlying rage that Sarah had never seen before. "Tom, you're overreacting." "It's nothing, just forget about it," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. But Tom wasn't listening. His eyes were wild, as if a cloud of jealousy had completely consumed him. Sarah could feel the space between them narrowing with every passing second, and in that moment, she knew something was terribly wrong. "You think you're too good for me, don't you?" Tom spat, his face red with fury. "You think you can just walk around, flaunting yourself in front of everyone? I'm your husband. I should be the only one you look at. No one else." His hands balled into fists at his sides, his body rigid with tension. Fear rushed through Sarah's veins. She knew how quickly Tom's anger could escalate. This wasn't just a petty argument. This was something darker, something more dangerous. She needed to get away from him, but the ship, with its endless stretch of water and isolation, made her feel trapped. "Number 6, please, Tom, calm down," she pleaded, stepping back even further. But before she could react, Tom lunged at her. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with surprising force, pulling her towards him. The movement was so sudden that Sarah didn't have time to brace herself. She stumbled, trying to pull away from his grip, but Tom's hold was too strong. She cried out as he yanked her forward. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. "You're mine. You'll always be mine." In a moment of sheer panic, Sarah tried to free herself, her legs buckling beneath her as she tried to push against his chest. She gasped for air, desperate to break free, but Tom's grip only tightened. Her mind raced, trying to think of anything, to escape this situation. She had to get away. She had to warn someone. But the ship was far from the shore, and she was alone, with no one to hear her cries. The fight between them continued, a blur of desperate movements. Tom's rage was now overwhelming. He shoved her backward, and in that moment, Sarah lost her footing, falling toward the edge of the ship's railing. She caught herself with her hands, her heart pounding in her chest, but before she could recover, Tom moved behind her, pushing her with all his might. In the blink of an eye, Sarah was thrown over the side of the railing, her body jerking as it plunged into the cold, dark water below. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The ocean stretched out before the ship, endless and dark. No one had seen or heard anything. Tom stood there, his chest heaving with ragged breaths, his heart pounding in his ears. He stared down at the water, the weight of his actions finally settling in. But there was no time to think about that. He had to act quickly. He couldn't let this ruin him. Tom ran back to the deck, pretending nothing had happened. He couldn't let anyone suspect what he had done. He told the ship's crew that Sarah had fallen, that it was a tragic accident. He told them she had been drunk and had lost her balance while standing near the railing. The ship's security immediately launched a search for Sarah, but by the time they began looking, there was no sign of her. The water was vast, and the darkness of the night made it nearly impossible to see anything. Tom, now playing the role of the grieving husband, feigned panic, acting as if he, too, was unaware of Sarah's fate. The ship continued its voyage, unaware of the horror that had taken place. It wasn't until the next morning, when the crews docked in a port city, that the authorities were informed. The story Tom had given was met with doubt. Investigators began piecing together the timeline of events and the inconsistencies in Tom's story. His calm demeanor and lack of visible distress raised red flags. The FBI, alerted to the case, began their investigation. The evidence started to mount. Surveillance footage showing Tom and Sarah's confrontation on the deck, witness statements from passengers who had heard Sarah scream, and Tom's suspicious behavior. The lie he had told was quickly unraveling, and soon the entire world would know the truth. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. As the cruise ship docked at the port, the serene beauty of the landscape contrasted sharply with the unfolding chaos on board. The ship, having carried thousands of passengers on a peaceful voyage, was now the scene of a horrific crime. A man had thrown his wife overboard into the vast, dark ocean, and the story was quickly unraveling. What Tom Brooks had hoped would be dismissed as an unfortunate accident was quickly spiraling into a nightmare that would require the full attention of law enforcement. The authorities were alerted immediately, and as the ship docked, the FBI took over the investigation. The luxury cruise line, originally responsible for the onboard security and safety, had now become an unwitting participant in a case that would make international headlines. What started as a missing persons case quickly turned into a murder investigation, with the evidence pointing toward Tom Brooks as the primary suspect. As law enforcement began their inquiry, the first challenge they faced was dealing with Tom's version of events. According to him, Sarah had simply fallen overboard after a drunken stumble near the ship's railing. His story was consistent with what he had told the crew in the immediate aftermath of the incident. He appeared genuinely distressed, playing the role of a grieving husband to perfection. He repeatedly claimed that he had been unable to save her, that it had all happened so quickly, and he expressed deep sorrow over losing his wife. But from the very beginning, there were cracks in his story. The ship's surveillance footage showed Tom and Sarah engaging in a heated argument just moments before the supposed fall. Several passengers also reported hearing Sarah scream, and some even claimed to have seen Tom physically pushing Sarah toward the railing during the confrontation. These conflicting reports didn't line up with the idea of an accident caused by a drunk stumble. As the FBI started to dig deeper, they questioned the crew members who had interacted with Tom and Sarah on the night of the incident. They learned that Tom had been unusually possessive and controlling throughout the trip, leading many to suspect there was more to their relationship than met the eye. Crew members described Sarah as a bright, social, and friendly woman who had seemed increasingly uncomfortable around her husband as the cruise went on. This, combined with the tension they had observed during the past few days, made it clear that something wasn't right. The FBI investigators, led by Special Agent Olivia Harper, began piecing together the timeline of events that occurred on the night of Sarah's death. Through careful analysis of security footage, witness testimonies, and Tom's statements, they started to uncover the truth. At 8:30 p.m., Tom and Sarah had been seen sitting together at dinner in the ship's upscale dining room, enjoying the beginning of what was supposed to be a relaxing evening. But just an hour later, everything changed. Witnesses recalled seeing Tom leave the dining area visibly upset after a confrontation between him and Sarah. Sarah's movements after that were tracked. She was seen walking toward the deck alone, but shortly afterward, Tom was captured on camera following her, his body language tense and angry. Witnesses confirmed that at approximately 10:15 p.m., a loud argument could be heard from the deck area. Several passengers reported hearing Sarah scream, and one even recalled hearing Tom's voice shouting, "You're going to regret this." It was in that moment that Sarah's life would be tragically cut short. At 10:17 p.m., Tom Brooks was seen standing alone on the deck, looking out over the railing. A few moments later, the ship's security footage showed Tom walking away from the railing and heading back inside, his expression calm, but his eyes avoiding the cameras. The timing was critical. According to the ship's official logs, the call for help was made by Tom at 10:30 p.m., when he reported Sarah's disappearance. By that time, Sarah had already fallen overboard, or rather had been pushed. Tom's calm behavior immediately after the incident, combined with the timing of the argument, led investigators to believe that Tom had orchestrated his wife's death. With Tom's story growing more and more inconsistent, the FBI turned to the physical evidence. The first thing they discovered was that Sarah's body was never recovered, despite extensive efforts to search the waters in the surrounding area. The ship had been in international waters, making it harder for the Coast Guard to respond promptly, and the darkness of the night further hindered visibility. However, investigators began searching the ship for any physical evidence of a struggle. In the cabin that Tom and Sarah had shared, forensic experts found significant evidence. A bloody handprint was found on the wall near the door, clearly showing that Sarah had attempted to fight off her attacker. There were also bruises on her wrists, indicating that she had been grabbed forcefully. Tom's claim that Sarah had simply lost her balance was becoming less and less believable with every piece of evidence that surfaced. Most damning of all was the discovery of blood stains on Tom's clothing. When the FBI examined his suit and shirt, they found traces of Sarah's blood, leading to the undeniable conclusion that he had been directly involved in her death. Further investigation into Tom's background revealed alarming details about his past. He had been married before, and in his previous relationship, his ex-wife had accused him of controlling behavior and had eventually left him after seeking a restraining order. Tom had a history of jealousy, possessiveness, and emotional manipulation, all of which now pointed to a pattern of behavior that culminated in murder. While the physical evidence was stacking up against Tom, there was still one piece of crucial evidence that would seal his fate: Sarah's phone. The phone had been found in her purse, which had been placed in their cabin, untouched, hours after her disappearance. The FBI immediately analyzed her messages and found that she had sent a text message just before the altercation that led to her death. In the final message she sent to her best friend, Megan, Sarah had written, "I think he's going to hurt me. If something happens to me, don't believe what he says. He's not who he appears to be." This message was the last testament of Sarah's fears, and it was a crucial moment that changed everything for the investigators. It was clear that she had known something was wrong and had tried to reach out for help before it was too late. The FBI now had both physical evidence and her final words to build a compelling case against Tom. With the evidence mounting and Tom's lies crumbling under scrutiny, the FBI was ready to make their move. They tracked Tom's movements as he attempted to flee the scene. After being questioned by investigators, Tom had attempted to board a flight back home, hoping to escape the consequences of his actions. However, FBI agents intercepted him at the airport before he could leave the country. As Tom was arrested, his face remained stoic, devoid of emotion. He knew his time was up, and there was no escaping the truth. The moment that he thought he could manipulate and control was now turning against him. He was no longer the grieving husband, but the cold-hearted killer responsible for his wife's death. The investigation that began with doubt and suspicion had turned into a clear-cut case of murder. The FBI had gathered all the evidence they needed, and Tom's fate was sealed. The tragic death of Sarah Brooks, in what should have been the happiest moment of her life, was now the subject of a nationwide manhunt and an ongoing trial. As the trial of Tom Brooks began, the courtroom was filled with a mix of emotions: grief, anger, disbelief, and a desperate need for justice. After the shocking revelations of Sarah Brooks's tragic death, it was now time for the court to hear the full details of her murder and the man responsible for it. This wasn't just about legal proceedings. It was a fight for the truth, for the voice of a woman who could no longer speak for herself, and for the closure her family and friends desperately needed. The courtroom was a scene of stark contrast. On one side sat the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Olivia Harper, a sharp and determined woman in her 40s, who had taken a special interest in this case from the beginning. Her passion for bringing justice to victims was evident in every word she spoke, as she tirelessly worked to prove that Tom Brooks had murdered his wife in cold blood. On the other side, Tom sat with his defense attorney, trying to maintain his composure, though the pressure of the trial weighed heavily on him. His face was a mask of calm, but anyone who looked closely could see the nervousness in his eyes. Tom's plea of innocence was met with skepticism from the very beginning. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Witness statements, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence all pointed to the fact that Sarah's death had not been an accident, but a calculated murder. Despite this, Tom's defense tried to argue that the fall had been unintentional and that Sarah's death had occurred due to her own recklessness. They painted him as a man who had suffered from temporary emotional distress after an argument, and that his actions had been unplanned and impulsive. The trial started with the opening statements, where both sides laid out their cases. The prosecutor, Olivia Harper, wasted no time in painting a vivid picture of Sarah's tragic final moments. She began by describing the beautiful, intelligent, and loving woman that Sarah had been. A woman with a bright future, full of ambition, and who had loved her husband deeply, only to be betrayed by him in the most unimaginable way. She then moved on to the key pieces of evidence that made it clear Sarah's death was not an accident. The security footage showing Tom's movements on the night of the incident, the bloody handprint found in their cabin, and the bruises on Sarah's wrists, evidence that she had been physically restrained before she was thrown overboard. The prosecutor also presented the chilling final text message Sarah had sent to her best friend, Megan, warning that she feared Tom would hurt her. Olivia Harper's voice was steady, but the emotional weight of the case was clear in her delivery. She was fighting not just for a conviction, but for the memory of a woman who had been tragically silenced. The defense, on the other hand, sought to create doubt in the jury's mind. They attempted to focus on Tom's emotional state, arguing that his actions had been the result of extreme stress. They claimed that Tom had been unaware of his own strength during the argument, and that Sarah's death had been a tragic accident. The defense tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence, suggesting that there was insufficient proof that Tom had actually intended to kill Sarah. They portrayed him as a man who was misunderstood, misguided, and overwhelmed by jealousy, but not a murderer. One of the most pivotal moments in the trial came when Megan, Sarah's best friend, took the stand. Her testimony was a gut-wrenching moment for everyone in the room. With tears in her eyes, Megan spoke of the deep connection she had shared with Sarah. She described the happy woman Sarah had been before the marriage, and the stark changes she had seen in her friend after marrying Tom. Megan testified about the emotional toll Sarah had suffered in the weeks leading up to the cruise, the tension in the marriage, and Sarah's fears of Tom's jealousy and controlling behavior. She shared the last text message that Sarah had sent to her, a message that had been an eerie premonition of what was to come. The defense tried to discredit Megan's testimony, but the jury could see the pain and truth in her words. It became clear that Tom's controlling behavior was not a new development. It had been escalating for months, and Sarah had been trapped in an abusive relationship. Megan's testimony was a turning point, providing a clear picture of the kind of manipulative, emotionally abusive behavior that had pushed Sarah into a corner. The most damning piece of evidence came from the forensic experts who testified about the physical evidence recovered from the scene. Bloodstains found on Tom's clothing, the bruises on Sarah's wrists, and the shattered phone all painted a chilling picture of domestic violence leading up to the murder. The handprint found on the cabin wall, in particular, was crucial. It was clear that Sarah had tried to fight back. The prosecution brought in a crime scene investigator who explained the position of Sarah's body on the deck, showing how Tom had likely pushed her with force toward the railing. The investigator also demonstrated that it would have been nearly impossible for Sarah to have fallen overboard on her own without any external force. This evidence was critical. It exposed the lie in Tom's story and proved that Sarah had been deliberately pushed into the ocean. In the closing arguments, Olivia Harper delivered a powerful, emotional plea to the jury. She spoke of the life Sarah had been denied, the future she never had a chance to live, and the family she had left behind. She reminded the jury that this case was not just about evidence. It was about the tragedy of an innocent woman's life being stolen by the one person who was supposed to protect her. The defense made one last attempt to cast doubt on the evidence, but it was clear to the jury that the case was solid. The mountain of evidence and the emotional testimony had left no room for doubt. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. Everyone in the room held their breath as the foreman stood up to deliver the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tom Brooks, guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent for a moment as the weight of the verdict settled in. Sarah's family, sitting in the front row, broke into tears, both of relief and sorrow. They had waited for this moment for so long, and now they knew that Tom would be held accountable for his actions. The grieving husband was no longer a victim. He was a murderer. Tom, however, showed no visible reaction to the verdict. His face remained blank, devoid of emotion. The years of control and manipulation had led him to this moment, where he would be locked away for the rest of his life. The judge, Judge Martha Turner, sentenced Tom to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tom was taken into custody, his freedom stripped away, as the gavel fell. The jury's verdict had brought justice for Sarah, and though she was gone, her memory would live on in the fight for victims of domestic violence. The trial had been a reminder of how appearances could be deceiving, and how a man's charming exterior could hide a dark, violent reality. The tragic murder of Sarah Brooks serves as a stark reminder of how appearances can be deceiving and how the dark side of domestic abuse can lurk behind closed doors. Tom and Sarah's marriage seemed perfect from the outside, but behind the smiles and the social media posts, there were warning signs that went unnoticed. Jealousy, manipulation, and control can gradually erode the foundation of a relationship, and when left unchecked, they can lead to horrific consequences. Sarah's final moments, filled with fear and desperation, reflect the isolation that many victims of domestic abuse feel. Her last message to her friend, warning of her husband's violent tendencies, is a chilling reminder of how often victims try to reach out for help, even when they feel trapped. It's vital that we recognize the signs of emotional abuse and control, as they often precede physical violence. This case also underscores the importance of speaking up and seeking help when in danger. Sarah's story could have been different if she had been able to find a way out before it was too late. Family, friends, and communities need to be vigilant and supportive, offering a safe space for those in abusive relationships to escape. Tom's actions were ultimately driven by insecurities and a need for power, but his crime was not just about one moment of rage. It was the culmination of months, perhaps even years, of toxic behavior. As we reflect on this tragedy, we must remember that no one deserves to feel controlled or fearful in their own home. Sarah's story should serve as a call to action, reminding us that awareness, intervention, and support can save lives.